end of the meeting as soon as you try and close the webinar out.
Recording's in progress.
Perfect. And we'll just edit it like we did before.
Yep. All right. Starting now.
All right.
And we are live.
Let's get started. How are we doing today, everybody?
We're good.
Good to see you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me join.
You bet. Good to have you. Always love your perspective on this kind of stuff. So, what are we doing here today? Well, what you need to know before you migrate your CAD CAM solution to the cloud. And I think there's one thing that I learned. There may be two situations. An engineering firm or an architect that uses CAD CAM solution like Autodesk that may have already migrated to the cloud, but that's kind of messed up, that migration, and you guys have fixed those things, or they're considering it and they want to move into the cloud. And so the thing that we're going to go through today is really that roadmap to make that migration. Definitely there's some challenges that people have and pain points that kick that into high gear, and we'll walk through the thoughts around strategy and the function that they need to happen. We'll also talk about licensing and costs. That's a real big deal. And then we'll go through a couple of case studies and outline steps to migrate. Then we'll leave some time for Q&A. And at the end, we'll talk about a really cool prize we're going to give away. So that's what we have on the agenda today.
Sprinkle that fairy dust.
Yeah. Well, earlier you were doing the robot, and I thought, oh, why don't we just tell everybody we're AI?
Yeah. I actually had that conversation earlier today with somebody, but different story. That's more of a security conversation. Today,
there you go.
Today we're talking about
that was our last webinar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things that we were going through when we talked about this is, these might be, if you're having these challenges, might be an indicator you're ready. So Grant, maybe talk about what are some of the things that companies experience when they come to you and say, hey, I think we might need this.
Yeah, absolutely. So the standard old technology of VPNs have some benefits, but most of them are drawbacks, especially when you're dealing with a server that's in your office. You have to VPN in, and either you're pulling really large files over the internet and it's super slow, or you've got a closet full of desktop computers that your staff are remoting into, and you're doubling the cost of your infrastructure. And ultimately, you're not getting the performance that you're looking for. And frankly, the technology has moved to the cloud. So the vendors, in this case, we're naming Autodesk today, but all their innovation is going to the cloud. It's not going to the local environments. So they're making sure that the challenges that you're having aren't necessarily going to go away unless you get into the cloud environment. Obviously, version control being one of them. I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation of like, hey, so one of my engineers made a change and we need to go back 6 months to figure out what they did. And so, having that type of version control, the capabilities to be able to go back that far without having to go through and restore backups, just a flick of the switch of being able to create a whole new model and go that direction. Having your business processes change, right? So you're, getting to a spot where, I think COVID was probably one of the biggest indicators of making this a challenge, is that overnight you have everybody start working from home, and frankly, most people haven't come back. So now you're in this situation where it's just not functioning the way you want it to anymore.
By the way, Autodesk is not sponsoring this webinar yet.
Yeah.
What are some other systems that you guys are familiar with?
We got to watch what vendors we name, because the moment that we hang up these calls, our vendors say, hey, we heard from so and so about this deal, so no, we're not getting funding from Autodesk.
Right.
That's our disclaimer.
Yeah.
And don't call them directly.
Well,
collisions, collisions, that's where files, basically you have multiple people in the same file at the same time, and the file didn't get locked properly, so you're dealing with that. That's a little bit more of a cloud problem, but that's being in the wrong cloud. So yeah.
Got it.
And Graham, before we pop on, Tony, if you can just go back to the last slide just really quickly. One of the things we didn't put in our slide is that, one of the challenges I see a lot of my customers having when I'm talking with them, or I shouldn't say it's a challenge, I should say it's an opportunity for them, is they're collaborating with their vendors and their customers in these environments, right? So they want to be able to share designs with their vendors or with a customer or a subcontractor, and they want everyone to be able to collaborate on that same file. And then also customers want to see this stuff now, right? So they want to see the PDF outputs and they want to see the modeling videos. And so getting the information end to end through that life cycle is really important. So, and I don't know why we forgot to add that to the list, but I was thinking of that as we went along.
So when you say customers want to see this stuff, you're talking about some big complicated design, CAD, design that they want to see, and getting access to it, such a big file, it's not conducive if you're not in the cloud. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because now that file lives on your server in your office. Your customer doesn't usually have remote connection capability into your office. And where I see this is specifically in like really big construction projects, or like for architecture, engineering, they're working with a company that has their own. So there's a team of people doing CAD at the design level. There's a group of people doing CAD at the production level or the construction level, and they need to be collaborating on that same document. And so they want to be in and accessing at the same time, not at the same time, like by the minute or second, but they want to have collaborative access.
Yeah. As updates occur.
Yeah.
I pulled a little data and some stats about, in the market, who's in the market for this. And I thought this was important because basically we're kind of talking about everybody from, from the middle bar over. And what struck me and then why I haven't read, is they're aware of cloud-based, obviously, but they never have even considered it. And I thought that was interesting. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Like, people aren't even thinking about cloud.
Yeah, it's a beast of a project, right? So you're used to having your business functions a certain way, and to go through and have the concept of changing how your business functions is a pretty big ask for a company. So when we're talking about business processes that are rooted into what makes that company them, right? And so making a change, keep in mind, like the engineers at Autodesk aren't taking your business process into account when they design the software. So you might not be able to do the same things or follow the same process that you did with having a localized server or being in a different environment. So I think that when people go through that conversation internally, they're like, some people think it might be a showstopper because they're not willing to adjust the process that they're using. And some people are just like, I don't have the resources to be able to do it or know who to talk to.
Right. Fear of the unknown. Like, this thing is way big, so let's just ignore it. It's like not going to the hospital because you have a heart pain, or whatever.
Yeah. I've also, so like CAD users were some of the very earliest people and companies with CAD users were some of the very first to adopt, like 35 years ago, adopt technology, because they had to have those tools to do what they needed to do. And so one is you have a really big base of users who are at the like mature end of life cycle of their careers. There's been only one way to do that, which has been in like either on their PC or their server in their office. So it's a really ingrained mentality that this is the only way we can do it. And the cloud technologies are exploding in the last couple of years. And so these folks, they're just maybe not connected with that, or like, hey, how can we actually make that happen? or maybe they're not looking up, right? They're just like, I'm just getting my job done.
Yeah.
So I see that being a big thing is that, CAD has been around for a really long time, and it's been done only really one way for a really long time.
Well, there's almost, it sounds like there's a convergence of three things, right? COVID hit, which made people need to work from home. Bandwidth, 5G bandwidth is starting to be more prevalent. And then you have kind of a transition of people from maybe early adopters 20 years ago to now what's available. And it's maybe this is starting to lower. By the way, this are some early numbers this year. So
yeah, and I would say the red is actually really good because I think it represents pressurization. We're starting to see clients that are having trouble continuing to operate the way they used to, or being in the wrong cloud hosting collaboration solution. And so I'm seeing pressure from my customers that they want solutions they're going to work for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so take that into consideration when you think about how do we break this down when you make these migrations. And what you guys told me was there are basically these four parts. Why are we doing it? What's the strategy behind it? How do we need it to function? What licenses do we need, or licensing do we need? And what does it cost? It's pretty basic, straightforward kind of roadmap when you think about these things.
Yeah, and we talked about strategy a little bit in some earlier conversation, but being able to get over those hurdles that have come around in the last couple of years. The Office Without Borders, I hear more and more like my workforce is remote. We have clients that have workforce that are doing 3D rendering, 3D CAD over in the Philippines, and having a server in here in the United States just doesn't make sense. So how do you make that function when you're talking about a global workforce? So that's strategy right there.
Yeah.
And then also being able to find, so talking about geographical location. Also mobile is becoming a big part of it as well. So you've got the full life cycle of the project. You have the engineers that are making these drawings, and then you have all the way out to the general contractors that are out in the field that are actually building them, and they're looking on iPads or phones at potentially even a 3D model, and they're spinning around and going in and looking at what it's supposed to look like. That's just not available when you have that data sitting on a server in a closet somewhere.
It's funny because you guys are talking about all this, and one of my other clients, they do something simple compared to what you guys do. They put in outdoor living spaces. Well, guess what? One of the things they do is to differentiate themselves, 3D renderings. And the person who does their 3D renderings is in Europe. They're here in the West Coast, and basically the reason why they do that is so they could get turnaround time quicker. But it's all done in the cloud.
Well, and you think about it from that perspective, if you're looking to be able to generate a 24-hour workforce, that's how you accomplish it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when you have a global workforce, what you have to pay somebody in the Philippines or India or even Eastern Europe is different than what you'd have to pay somebody here. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case, but you have all of these financial considerations that you have to look at.
Public notice: we're not advocating for outsourcing, just potentially a strategy. There's quite a few different strategies. I mean, everything from aging out infrastructure. You got a server that's coming up that's due to be replaced. You're looking down the barrel of $15K plus to replace that server out. At this, moving to a OpEx versus a CapEx, there's a lot of strategy there of why you'd want to be on the latest and greatest always versus having to go through a life cycle every 7 years.
Right. So this is everybody's favorite topic, I think, because it can get complex. It's easy. Well, from my standpoint, it's easy to say, "Oh, this is why we want to do it because we're having these challenges." Now, like, what is it actually going to cost us to do this? How do we even figure that out? And a lot of it is the licensing part of it.
Yeah, unfortunately, Autodesk is not a nonprofit, so they're going to make sure that they get into your pockets in some way, shape, or form.
What they want to make money.
Yeah, they got to support those the development of it. But yeah, it comes down to licensing. For the most part, you're going to see that either you're going to be flush on what it costs to replace the server one time with like a migration and licensing, and over a period of time, you'll actually see a cost reduction depending on the setup. So, like Tony said, the licensing can get fairly complex on the requirement of functionality that you're looking for. So function determines cost. And so I think that's something really important to point out, is that having some flexibility in what type of employee is performing what function, you can also get very granular on what that licensing is going to cost as well. Head count plays a big part into it. And then is the licensing, are you already paying for licensing? Is it something that you have a package with Autodesk currently, and you maybe already are paying for some of the licensing and functions that you need, and you just aren't using them? So then you just have a balance of, what users need to have that and which ones don't.
That struck me as interesting when we were going through, like, hey, what do we talk about? And, everybody builds out these slides. Well, what do we talk about and why? And you said, oh, some people already have the licensing bundled into what they have. They're just not using it. And I was like, well, then what are they paying for? Like, how did they get there? And
they're paying a premium basically to utilize the software, but not utilize all the function.
Right. Interesting. Well, looking at those types of things, let's go through that licensing part of it. And you sent me a snapshot and we pulled it up here, and there's things like the different types of subscriptions, the quantity of seats, how long is the license, here's when it expires, all of that stuff. By the way, for someone like me, this would be like a half-time job, just tracking when licensing expires. So why don't you walk us through what this tells you about? This is a live example, right? This is.
Yep. Yeah. So this is a current example. And so at the very top, you have the architecture, engineering, construction collection. That's kind of like the big guy, right? So that's a premium license. It has all the 3D rendering tools, Revit, Civil 3D, things like that. Plus, it has all the cloud collaboration tools as well.
It's like you get access to the platform.
I'm sure that they have something even higher than that, but yeah, it's kind of when we think about architecture, engineering, construction based industry, that's kind of the go-to license because it has everything in it. There's probably, 15, 20 different items that come with it. We're not going to go through them all today, but the specific one is the cloud collaboration tools, which is also known as Autodesk Docs. So in this scenario, you see that half of the staff already have a full-blown license. And then we had it for the next part of the staff, we had to get the Autodesk Docs because they weren't in the full package, the construction. So they're just, excuse me, just maybe doing AutoCAD files that didn't require that full package. And then you have the other ones that are like using 3D rendering like Revit that needed the full licensing package. So yeah, it basically, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just, I saw a question come in, and I thought, I know we have a space for that, but I thought I would just ask, will there be an opportunity for those already on the cloud to discuss the migration of files from SharePoint to Autodesk Docs?
Sure, we can talk about that. And there's also, so a little teaser, that may not be the best choice. There might be other solutions that don't include Autodesk Docs, or they can include other solutions with Autodesk Docs. So that's the whole kind of the interesting conversation, is that, and we'll discuss it here on these slides, about data siloing. and what problems that creates.
So when I looked at this and I saw 8 seats, 1 seat, 2 seats, 6 seat, like why? And I think you explained a little bit, you know, you need some people that need access to certain parts and other people that don't, but they need access to like docs but that's part of figuring it out, right? Is knowing what you need.
You have to have a really good understanding of what staff member is doing what and what sort of function they need to have to perform the job, but also understand what functionality are you trying to get out of it too. So if you're looking just to be able to do file sharing and some collaboration, okay, maybe docs is all you need. But if you're looking to get into being able to have multiple people in the same file making adjustments to, one person's making an adjustment on this wall and the other person's making an adjustment on this wall, it doesn't all sync, right? It's not all the same tool set. So that's why it's very interesting to have that conversation of saying, okay, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals from a functionality perspective? And then at that point, you can decide what type of license you need and frankly, what platform you need to have involved.
Right. Let's go through a case study, and Grant, maybe walk us through this scenario. Whenever I think of server and server coming up for replacement, I think of lifecycle management. You know, our servers are coming up, our laptops, our machines. Here's who's using what. This, you know, if you guys are monitoring like you do, you'll know when that stuff is coming up. This just happens to be a server that's running, you know, Autodesk.
Yep.
Maybe walk us through kind of this scenario and what happened and kind of what you guys did.
Yeah. So basically every 7 years the vendors say the server, the hardware needs to be replaced, or Microsoft saying the operating system needs to be replaced. And sometimes they're in conjunction, sometimes they're not. But ultimately you're looking at doing some form of migration, whether it's to a new server or if it's to a cloud. And honestly, nowadays, I'm hard pressed to recommend a server unless there is a specific application that needs to reside there. Some accounting platforms still need to have a home in the office, but most cases, if you're small, you know, if you're under 100 people, I mean, even maybe 50, you know, having a server in place, the technology's moved to the cloud, and so there's no reason to have it. Like I said, not to mention, you know, like I said earlier, you're staring down the barrel of 15, maybe 20K to replace that server. And what kind of benefit is it giving you? It's just, you know, it's allowing you to do business, but you're not getting any strategic value out of it. So if you're looking at the reason to spend, you know, that type of money, you might as well get up to the next latest and greatest. You want to get that extra functionality that the cloud will bring. That actually brings real tools back to your office that will help advance your business. So this case, I mean, like it's a CapEx versus OpEx. So if you move to the cloud, you're paying a monthly subscription in most cases, or you might have an annual subscription that's billed out monthly, or you might have a one-time annual, based subscription versus that one lump sum upfront. But ultimately, by moving to the cloud, you're solving a lot of these problems that exist with having that server in a closet. One of them is being business continuity. So you think about business continuity, like what happens, during theft, fire, natural disaster. You got that box in a closet, and so how does everybody get connected? How is that going to impact your business? And so if you have a cloud first mentality, if something goes wrong, you send your staff home, everybody's working from home, and you don't miss a beat. And ultimately I get to ask the question of like, well, what happens if Microsoft or Autodesk goes down? And I answer, we have bigger problems.
Right.
But
Yeah.
so business continuity being one of them. Like I said, solving the VPN connectivity problems, money related issues, they all go away.
Grant, also one of the things too that we see is there's a lot of overhead to have a server in your office. So you have the backup solution, which there's a cost to that. You're now having to have professional IT support to manage the server and the backup solution. So there's a monthly cost for that. There's network infrastructure like switches and cabling and all of that that go along with it. So when you can get rid of the server when it's not needed, you can really streamline things. And it's not just like that one-time cost. There's a lot of monthly costs available with it too.
I think it used to be like a control thing, like, oh, I know where it is.
I know where my data is.
I can go touch the box if I need. I mean, people didn't do that, but maybe this goes back to your point, Andrew, about folks early on who adopted this technology that worked, and now there's this new level of technology that lets you be. I mean, the remote thing alone. Of course, I've been working, remotely for 20 years, so I'm used to it. And you guys are used to working in and out of your clients' offices remotely for the most part. I mean, you guys do paid visits, obviously, but it just seems like there also maybe was a thought of, oh, we got to spend a bunch of money in December to save on taxes kind of thing. That whole philosophy around management of technology has existed for a while. So this is just, leveling up on all that stuff. When we went through this next example, you actually, this is the example of, hey, they already migrated to the cloud, but weren't very successful. So Grant, talk us through this example.
So all cloud environments are not created equal. They have different functions based on the vendor. And so each vendor is really focused on their own technologies. But the business has many different file types that are used to run their businesses, and not all of them come from one vendor. In fact, in most cases, you're going to have potentially 5, 6. I think in our case, we have like 30 plus. So everybody's kind of got their own set of tools. And so to think that one cloud environment rules them all, it just doesn't make sense, right? Microsoft doesn't care about CAD, and CAD doesn't care about Microsoft. That the functionality is just not the same. And so there's actually impacts, straight business impacts, when you go to the wrong cloud, because there might be something that is an actual showstopper that actually truly impacts your business financially and from a productivity standpoint. And so in speaking of like SharePoint, specifically, having CAD CAD is kind of a problem. You get into 3D rendering type software, and it's a really big problem. You just have collisions constantly that are happening. People are stepping over each other, synchronization issues. It's just not designed to be there. So yeah, you have to choose your path wisely.
And remind us common folk, what's a collision?
A collision is when you have two people in the same file at the same time, and then they try to save on top of each other. And since the system doesn't know which one is actually the true file, it creates a collision or creates another file. And so the work didn't get saved to the right file. And so now the person has to be able to take that work and try to put it back into the original file. So you're essentially doing the work twice.
Oh, wow.
because of a technical problem. Most people are said, there's not that many people in the file at the same time. The answer is we see it all the time. You got to be in the right platform to be able to lock the file. So if you do try to open a file that somebody's in, whether they knew it or not, at least it tells you and says, this person's in the file. It's read only, you can't access it. And there's a few technologies out there that allow that to happen, but there's only a few sets of files that actually lock when users get into it. So like Word, Excel lock automatically in the right environments like SharePoint. AutoCAD files require a lock. Revit files, Civil 3D, all these things require locking, so you don't have these types of issues. But some clouds don't honor that locking mechanism.
Oh, interesting. Could be I imagine this was like a bowl of spaghetti and you're like grabbing each of the ones out at a time to try to separate what's going on.
Yeah.
What are you going to say,
We have
Andrew?
been separating a lot of spaghetti. There's been a lot of spaghetti separating lately. So what Grant, like the flip side of what Grant's talking about is, and this is what we're really seeing, is these vendors are building functions in their cloud environments that enhance their programs. So like in the case of Microsoft's SharePoint system, Microsoft has built functions so that Word, Excel, PowerPoint, that multiple people can be in those files at the same time, and there are no collisions. You move that Word, Excel, or PowerPoint file to a different system, and it starts to have collisions. And CAD's the same way, right? Like, or Autodesk, they build their environments so that their Revit system, which is usually multiple people on the same file, they can do their functionality in the BIM 360 system. But if you take that same file and put it in SharePoint, it becomes problematic. And so we're really seeing this silos. Oh, there you go. A nice segue there. The siloing of these different systems. And, there is unfortunately, this is kind of a middle ground. We are seeing some emerging trends for third-party vendors to orchestrate all kinds of different files. And Grant, we'll chat about that here in a little second, but let's talk about data silos. So Grant, if you want to run with that, or Tony.
Sure.
Well,
yeah.
I was just saying before, I've always been taught silos is like a bad word because everything's separate. You don't want everything separate.
Yeah,
but that might be more on data management. But when you guys talk about this, Grant, I kind of interrupted you there.
So no, I think that your thought is correct. I mean, data siloing makes things difficult, right? And so when you go to a vendor specific cloud, there's going to be some siloing that happens because you're looking for that functionality. So Autodesk Docs, there's a completely different set of functions here than there are down here in SharePoint. And so I can open a CAD file from here and it will lock. I can't, or a Revit file, and I'll get full functionality. If that file existed down below here, I'm going to have problems. And so the issue is that how do you solve that silo problem? How do you get data where it's basically in one spot? And that's the trick, right? Of how do we get it to where you get the functionality and you get the data in the same spot? I'm not going to give anybody the names of how we're going to do that. You got to call me for those.
But that's part of understanding who needs what files for why. Maybe there's some roles that need files in each platform. Maybe some that don't. I don't.
So this is where the business process comes in, right? So in some cases, this might work perfectly fine. Where you have your project files here and your business files down here in SharePoint. Sorry, I'm moving my mouse around like you guys can see it. I apologize. So Autodesk, you keep your project files in Autodesk, and that's all that exists there, right? And then you keep your business related documents in SharePoint. But in some cases, that's not acceptable, right? People are looking to have both business related documents, PDF, Word, Excel, and your product that you're producing in the same folder inside your project because that is your product. And so that's the question of, can I get around a change of business process where it lives in two locations, and I do some sort of little level of data management where I'm done working on a project and I move it all down into my business documents, or vice versa. So when you're archiving that file, you're not really in it anymore. So it doesn't really matter where it lives anymore because you don't care about the functionality. And so is it worth the additional process to go through that? Or is there a better solution?
Well, I can tell you from firsthand experience, and you guys we've worked together long enough where having someone and Andrew always says this, like, okay, who's the grown up in the room, right? Having a grown up in the room that understands the organization and the business processes so that you can develop the discipline to put the files where they need to go, because that makes everything work well, the business process. I would have a gazillion files all over the place, right? It's like, oh no, this is how we organize. This is what we do. This is why we do it. And communicating about that is a real value. So I get what you guys are after. And it just takes, communication about it. And and the organization to do it. But that also talks about like, okay, pre-engineering. What are we doing to get ready for all of this?
Well,
And this is where,
sorry, on that last, I was going to point out, like, yet even if you go back real quick, even another, so I've got Adobe Creative Cloud here, yet another data silo. So if you have some design work that happens, you might have, marketing slicks that you put out or presentations that are done outside of an Autodesk environment. So yet you've got a third data silo now where the data doesn't sit where it's supposed to. So it's, there's got to be there's a better solution, right, than potentially having it all put together. But how do you get it all to work in conjunction where it doesn't impact your business?
yeah. So maybe before we talk about pre-engineering, what to do to get ready, I'll just open it up for Q&A to start. I know, thanks, Jack, for asking that question a little earlier. The things I'll kickstart it. The thing I always ask is, okay, we've done this fancy presentation. We've talked about all these things. What's like the one thing you want people to take away from this conversation?
Yeah. So the biggest thing when you're looking at migration, whether it be from an existing server or an existing cloud platform like SharePoint that Jack is asking about, is understanding what you want it to look like when it gets there and how you want it to function. Spend a lot of time in pre-engineering. It is very, very important because it'll dictate how your system's going to function once everything happens. Like I said, we've fixed quite a few where people have just done, moved all their data to SharePoint on a whim, and you get there, the permissions are off, the functionality is wrong, the folder structure is messed up, and so it's just they're not set up for success. And then ultimately you see basically an attrition from staff. They just stop using some of those technologies and they just start putting it back on their desktop. And then at that point, that creates problems because if the desktop blows up, then you've got data that's missing.
So it's kind of like understand why you're doing it. What are the business reasons for doing it? And spend a lot of time in pre-engineering so you're not stepping over yourself when you actually go to execute it. And the first thing you guys are talking about is check your current licensing. How does it set up?
Yeah, what is it going to pay?
That's what you're after. That kind of talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, what's going to cost, right? So is this is it a showstopper before you even get there? Is it too expensive? Do you have to license everyone in your staff, or are you already paying for some of it? We call that the sanity check, right? So are the numbers going to pencil out once everything's said and done? Yeah. So yeah, folder structure, naming conventions, really big thing. This is a good opportunity if you're going to make the move to start looking at not what you necessarily have today, but what you want to look like tomorrow. We take this opportunity when we're doing the project to get input from the stakeholders of like, hey, your structure might be messy, right? This is a great time to clean it up because we're gonna have to move everything the way it is now. Sure, we can forklift it, but chances are it's not going to work the way you want it to.
Yeah. It's kind of like I always use the building analogy, right? Are we remodeling the home or are we building a new home?
Correct.
And basically in this scenario, you're saying, look, engineer, architect the home, design it, draw it up, however you want to say it, like you want it, because this is your new custom home.
Well, and there's some gotchas in there too. And like SharePoint has limitations. It has character length limitations. It has file count limitations. It has a lot of data limitations. And so hopefully I don't get struck down by the Microsoft lightning bolt, for saying these things, but it's true, right? So if you're looking at a cascading, so you have like a folder structure that's, you have all your clients and under there you have all these cascading folders. And so you might have, potentially 25 different folders under your root folder. You may actually run out of character space to actually have the proper names on your files. Like we've seen files that is like the entire address of a client, And you think about like you have 255 characters available in the whole naming path, and 30 of them are taken up by just the name of the file. And so all of a sudden things break. And so going through that engineering process to really understand, if I try to move this, is it going to work when it gets there? And so we've seen that happen a lot of times where people's kind of run up against a wall and they're like, I moved everything on my own and it doesn't work. And so we go through and have to do analyze why things are broken in the first place. But it's really important just to figure out all the gotchas of, and understand the limitations of the structures themselves.
Well, I love it because, we're in this self-serve world, right? Everything we do on our phone is like, oh, I can set that up. And it's just technology. It's just files.
You got an easy
buy the
button.
license, turn it on and move some files over. We're done.
Yeah. You got that big easy button.
That's
right
the way
here.
everybody thinks. It's kind of like the building videos. If you ever watch them, it makes it look like you can build a house in a couple of hours. And there's no substitute for professional people like you guys who understand these little nuances. There's just a few more things that are, the one that you talk about gotchas. Well, these aren't the only systems in use, right? There may be need to grab data or integrate from other systems.
Well, and that's the key that I was alluding to earlier, is that with the integrations, now you're potentially able to get yourself out of that silo. And so what do you integrate with? How do you integrate it? What sort of functionality will that integration bring you? And so now that you have data potentially in different locations, if you have these integrations, some are fully developed integrations, some are APIs that you're able to program the interfaces between the two different companies,
right,
and be able to move data back and forth. So that's how you start getting over these two different areas of how data sits and how it's dealt with.
Right. I'm sensing a phased approach. Well, pre-engineering, you're talking about pre-engineering, thinking through all the things on paper or, before they ever happen to make sure it goes well. Kind of like engineering a building or architecting a building.
Yep. You want to have a very solid foundation before you start building something up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on that, Tony, sorry, before you move on.
Yeah.
So one of the things, so we're talking about pre-planning, right, which takes time and thought. And one of the trends we're seeing emerging is over the last 6 months, specifically with Microsoft SharePoint system, is we're finding that customers who have CAD files in that, who've been working great for years, are starting to have issues. And so we are seeing some hot buttons, some hot spots popping up with customers who all of a sudden SharePoint just stops working the way it's supposed to, or it changes. I can tell you we're not getting any information from Microsoft or Autodesk that says they changed something, but something has changed. And so what we have to make the assumption is that these Microsoft and their 365 strategy and Autodesk and their Autodesk Docs or their cloud strategy, they're not talking to each other, right? Like they're on separate paths that just happen to be parallel at the moment. And a customer is like, straddling one and the other, like, oh, we're doing good. And then this one shifts over this way or this one shifts that way. So now we have customers that their legs are getting stretched very far and they're getting very uncomfortable with it. And it's becoming an impact to them. So we right now we're like either wrapping up or in discussions with several customers about, what do we move to? What do we do? What are the next steps? And why did this break like 3 months ago or 6 months ago? And we're like, I don't know why it broke, but I can guarantee you the two systems weren't designed to work together. So, we have had officially, Microsoft has given us documentation that states that, they don't think Autodesk files or AutoCAD files specifically can work in Microsoft 365 because of how they have to lock, and that with that collision and all of that. So, although pre-engineering takes time, there is some urgency, but I would say for those who are not having issues, it's mostly cloud solutions. People on servers, they're just plodding along like they normally would be, but they're just stuck in their office too. So there's pros and cons for each thing.
Right, right. Well, it's good you guys keep an eye on that kind of information that's out there so you can be informed, you know. It's like when Google makes changes online. They don't need to tell anybody. They try to after the fact. We go, oh,
Sorry.
sorry about that. We rolled over in the middle of the night and crushed, 10 million businesses or whatever. But it's that, I guess that's what keeps the world working, I guess.
And like I say, the key is knowing your functionality, and your functionality will determine your platform. And so that, like I said, we've been talking about a lot about Autodesk Docs, but there are potentially other platforms that data can reside in. And then you use integrations to click over to Autodesk Docs and integrate into 365 and other platforms. So there is the best of both worlds. Well, how about this? There's never the best of both worlds, but you can definitely start bringing in the gap by utilizing different sets of tools. So with that, if you have those questions, I'm not going to give it to you on the call because then you're going to call the vendors. But, hey, give me a ring and I'll walk you through the process.
Well, speaking of questions, now we'll just open it up for a little bit to have a Q&A going. I don't know if Jack is still out there, if he has any more questions.
So yeah, we discussed it a little bit, but somebody that's already on the cloud discussed migration from SharePoint to Autodesk Docs. So we've done this quite a few times. It's not an apples to apples. So by moving to Autodesk Docs from SharePoint, you gain functionality and lose functionality. And so that's why we specifically talked about in this webinar about siloing the data, so you don't lose that functionality. So when I talk about functionality, so like collaborative environment where if you're in an Excel document and you can actually see somebody else typing in the same time, or seeing co-editing happen in Word files, if you move those files over to Autodesk, that functionality goes away. Is it a big deal? Is it something that's used in your office? Maybe, maybe not. That's something that, once again, you have to have that discussion of, is that a showstopper? Is that part of my business process now? And do I need to keep that there? So those are all conversations you need to sit down and talk about with all the key players, and saying, somebody making a general broad decision saying, yeah, we don't use that. Well, then you come to find out that 3 or 4 people lived in that type of system, and now you've made that transition, and now you have to move all your files back. So you want to think through the process. You want to listen to your consultants tell you not to do something. I think that's a really big one. We've gone through where I'm like, I don't recommend doing this. They're like, it's not a problem. I'm like, it's going to be a problem. It's like, I told you so, but you're like, hey, customer's always right.
Sure,
So
sure.
we'll fix the problem for you, but listen to, when we tell you not to do something, really, really think long and hard about it.
There's a reason behind
There's
that.
a reason behind it. Yeah.
So one question I have, so what's the real okay, cut the guard. What's the real impact to a person or somebody's business and processes if they decide to do this? How do you answer that? Like, okay, cut to the chase.
Yes.
Give me
so
the
obviously the price tag of the migration and the engineering, so there's a cost associated with it. the functionality may be a game changer for some companies, where they have the capabilities that they've never had before and are able to compete for deals that they couldn't get before. We talked about a globalization of a workforce. So now you might be able to have the same work done at a significantly cheaper rate. That might change a business's trajectory.
Andrew, anything to add to that, or your experience on the ground?
Yeah, what I see when I'm working with customers that make these sort of changes is that it's changing their business process, right? So if everything is, let's say, in a server environment, or it's a single, like let's say SharePoint and Microsoft 365, everything is in one place, and they're used to that methodology and that mindset. And now they've moved their specific files, let's say Autodesk, to the Autodesk Docs cloud, and they've left everything in Microsoft 365. All of a sudden, their business process changed. People don't like change. I mean, as humans, our brains are programmed for the familiar, right? Like, so every time we have a business, or like we have a process that becomes a habit, it's easy for us to process it internally in our brains. We have pathways for that. And then a new process is like, oh, now our brain is building new pathways, and it takes a bunch of time to get over that. So there's resistance that happens when they have this change. So I would say don't do it lightly. You definitely want to make sure that you have like team buy-in. It's something that comes from the very top level of the organization, and everyone's committed that these new features or the abilities that it gives us outweighs the disadvantages of where we are currently. And know your team. Like, if you're a really like change adverse team, probably minimize the change. If you're very adventurous and want to get out there, then let's do that. What I see happening is kind of a mix of both. And really the driver that I'm getting is customers want to have access to these files in the cloud so they can get in there, do their part of the collaboration, and they're basically mandating it to their vendors. And so our customers who would represent the vendor in that situation have to change because their customer says, I want this tool. They don't care what the impact is to my customer. They're just like, make it happen. So some of them are getting drug along a little bit reluctantly. Some of them don't want to have to pay for the server migration. There's just a lot of intersecting paths right now for this specific type of technology.
Right. Good insight. Well, I saw Suzanne out there raise her hand, which I messaged her. So Suzanne, if you go to the Q&A section down at the bottom, you can type in a question there if you have one. Maybe if we don't get that, we can follow up with Suzanne afterwards. So I'll just give her a second or two. But it's like everything else. You go into it with eyes wide open and, a little bit of planning. Make sure you bring in the right people who have experience. Sakuri, go through the pre-engineering piece. I mean, that's kind of what and in that pre-engineering piece, think about how businesses work. Oh, Suzanne let us know she hit the accident. The old I hit the button by accident trick.
I think you're right. I mean, if there's a takeaway from this, is sit down and plan it out. Everybody that's on this call is in the engineering and construction architecture. I'm like, that's what you guys do for a living, right? Is sit down and plan it out. Don't let this be any different. It's the thought process that you put in up front is going to make all the difference for your results.
Perfect. So one of you guys want to talk about what we're going to give away? Yeah.
So we know that there's actually quite a few people on this call that have already talked to us about doing these types of projects. So we wanted to be able to go ahead and give away the development side of it, or the pre-engineering side of it, for free. So that's a big part of the migration project, is the pre-sales engineering, where we go through and decide what actually needs to take place, where things need to go, what the folder structure is going to look like. So we wanted to make sure that for anybody that was attending, that when we give this away, that they get a nice value for it.
Oh, that's
now, just to clarify, because I'm the contract reader, this is one that we're giving away to one attendee.
What? We're not giving away to everybody, Andrew. I'm the marketing dude. Yeah. It's like everybody, you get a migration.
we got Oprah on the phone here.
I really appreciate you being the adult in the room, Andrew. Yeah.
Just one.
Yeah, we need one. Right.
I'm just watching my staff like going sideways. So
yeah.
Well, it's a big enough deal to
25 migration projects.
It is a big enough deal you know, that this is pretty valuable, because you're going to help someone pre-think through everything. So that's a big thing. Everybody, I think, knows what we do here. Multiple types. We did have a webinar on security. That's a new word. Security and AI. I think we're planning one on business process automation, I think, is our next one. Anyway, keep an eye out for that.
That kind of dovetails into the integration side of it with workflows and dealing with the data silos of how do you get stuff moving around. So that's also part of business process automation.
Yeah. So many applications out there and ways to automate it than there never has been before. So it's an important piece. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming, for attending. We'll be reaching out to you and getting this video, getting access to this video. Grant, Andrew, as always, every time we talk, even though it's something as you know, seemingly unimportant as file structure, you guys make me understand that it's really important. So I appreciate you and thank you guys for all that you do.
Hopefully we made it exciting. Folder structure.
Yes.
File structure. Pre-engineering. Woohoo! All right, guys.
Awesome.
Well, have a good one. Thank you all.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Bye-bye.
Bye.